Welcome to the Explainer, everyone. Today, we are going on an absolute deep dive into the incredibly intricate tactical doctrines of wind magic and battlefield survival from the text Dreamweaver. And honestly, if you have ever found yourself wondering how the mechanics of fantasy warfare might actually hold up under rigorous, real-world military strategy, well, you are in for a serious treat today. We're going to unpack the brilliant military logic hidden right inside the concept of the aerial shields. What I find absolutely fascinating about this, what really drew me in, is how this text grounds its magical combat in highly applicable, incredibly sound tactical philosophy. We are not just talking about throwing fantasy spells around here. Not at all. These are hardcore lessons in resource management, extreme situational awareness, and the kind of leadership under fire that can honestly change how you view conflict and strategy in your own everyday life. So, let's get right into it. Here is our roadmap for this masterclass. We'll start with the aerial bloodline limit. Then we'll move into support, specifically breath and sound. From there, we tackle navigation and tracking tactics. After that, it's the combative defenders of the firmament. And finally, we will wrap up with the strict rules of combative archery. All right, part one, the aerial bloodline limit. This is all about the philosophy of dividing labor. To really wrap our heads around this, we have to start at the Mountain of Olympus. Imagine stepping through a purely symbolic door. On one side, you have the bow of Orion, and on the other, the winds of adversity. The absolute core philosophy established here is the strict, uncompromising necessity of dividing labor. As the character Eileen points out so perfectly in our source material, attempting to fight while simultaneously trying to coordinate, it just leads to divided attention. And in a war zone, divided attention maximizes casualties. It's that simple. A battlefield isn't some static, predictable environment, right? It is continuously evolving with literally infinite variables thrown at you every second. Therefore, your combative types must focus entirely on offering support by ensuring the enemy absolutely does not break through that front line. No distractions. Conversely, your support types, they have to focus solely on healing and coordination. They act purely as the senses of the group. Think about the massive life or death stakes here. If your designated healer is up there swinging a sword on the front lines and they go down, well, the entire injured party dies right along with them. There is simply no room for multitasking when human lives are on the line. And this illustrates exactly why healers have to remain on the battlefield, yes, but firmly, securely tucked away from the front lines. The text uses a fantastic, incredibly relatable analogy here, comparing battlefield positioning to political opinion polls. Just think about it. The leaders of a country use opinion polls to measure the mood of the populace, right? They do that without physically fighting every single political battle in the streets or locking themselves in a vacuum. In the exact same way, a leader in battle has to keep their support units close enough to gauge the overall health and morale of the army, but completely shielded from direct hand-to-hand conflict. You can easily relate this to your own team dynamics at work or in life. You cannot accurately assess the health of your project or protect your most vital, indispensable assets if you are constantly drowning in the daily microtasks of the frontline. You have to step back to see the whole board. Which brings us to this profound tactical truth from the source. The weakest member becomes the exact measure of your party's strength. It sounds a little harsh at first, but this is exactly how you forge a chain without a single weak link. You have to purposefully ensure that your defensive zone is perfectly, completely safe for your most vulnerable member. Because let's face it, you cannot effectively fight off a debilitating enemy influence if the very people responsible for curing you are exposed to that exact same danger. The environment you create dictates your team's survival. Okay, moving on to section 2, support, breath, and sound. So in this universe, true power very often lies in manipulating what you literally cannot see. Wind magic here is categorized into two major applications, and the first one is aerial breath. I want you to think of this as your ultimate god-tier buff and debuff zone control. By physically manipulating the wind currents, a support type literally changes the tide of the environment to favor their team. We're talking about generating enhancing atmospheres that give allies a boost, clearing away heavy, unnatural mists of confusion, or even violently blowing back debilitating toxic effects cast by an adversary. You are quite literally severing the enemy's influence from the battlefield. It is raw, total atmospheric terrain control. You're taking the invisible air around you and turning it into a tangible, defensive fortress. Now, the second application is aerial sound. And what's super cool about this is how directly it mirrors actual nature. Think about bats or whales in the deep ocean, using echolocation to navigate total blind spots in dark caves or murky water. Aerial sound works the same way. It uses the wind as a medium to channel sonic vibrations for cartography. So it effectively maps out complex, labyrinthine terrains where visibility is basically zero. But it doesn't stop at just mapping. This also doubles as a secure communication network. It functions as a massive, vital morale boost for the troops and acts as a direct, active countermeasure against enemy's psychological warfare that's designed to crush the spirits of your allies. It keeps everyone connected in the dark. And all of this heavy, monumental responsibility falls squarely on the shoulders of the support units. Much like the Earth's atmosphere constantly protecting us from harmful ultraviolet rays, aerial support types act as the ultimate filter and the final shield. The text brilliantly equates this burden to the mythic House of Atlas, literally carrying the sky. No pressure, right? A single misstep or a momentary lapse in focus by a coordinator doesn't just mean you lose a minor skirmish. It can lead an entire army straight into a fatal trap. The failure of a support type could result in the loss of a battle, a war, or even an entire nation. They are the invisible, completely indispensable backbone protecting absolutely everyone from total annihilation. Let's dive into Section 3, Navigation and Tracking Tactics. So how do all these high-level theories actually translate into a deadly, boots-on-the-ground game of hide-and-seek inside a mist-filled labyrinth? Because in this world, survival very often means finding the invisible. When you are tracking a target, you simply cannot just wander around blindly, hoping to stumble into them. If you're up against an intelligent, thinking adversary who knows they are being hunted, they are absolutely going to lay down false trails to deceive you. You have to systematically, rigorously investigate the physical evidence left behind. Your survival completely depends on your ability to discern the real trail from the meticulously crafted fake one. To pull this off, you essentially have to deconstruct their physical profile, just like a master detective working a crime scene, relying on 4 highly specific indicators. First up, size. If the footprints aren't completely uniform, that tells you instantly your target is employing backup, or maybe using decoys. Second is freshness. Loose, disturbed earth means you are right behind them, literally on their heels before the weather, humidity, or sunshine has had a chance to cause the trail to solidify and erode. Third is depth. This reveals the exact physical weight pressing down into the earth, which tells you a lot about their gear and physical build. And fourth is stride, the literal distance between the prints. This gives away the target's height, and by extension, you can often deduce their general age. Now, here is the kicker. If all 4 of these factors perfectly, identically match across multiple branching paths, you know immediately, without a shadow of a doubt, that your adversary is using a cloning technique specifically designed to split your attention and walk you into a trap. The absolute core lesson to take away here: never ever overly rely on your eyes in the fog of war, because smart adversaries will use advanced concealment techniques, thick unnatural mists, and clone decoys to completely distort your senses and induce sheer terror. The source specifically notes that in the forests of frights, relying on your distorted sight inevitably leads to panic. And what happens when you panic? Your heart rate elevates, and in this universe, that elevated heart rate acts as a beacon. It attracts predators that literally hunt by sensing fear. It's actually a perfect, visceral metaphor for high-stress situations in our own real lives. When your senses are completely overwhelmed and that cold panic starts to creep in, you have to forcefully calm down, fall back on methodical, grounded analysis, and trust your support tools to guide you out. But that raises a massive question. What happens when an adversary bypasses the ground entirely? What if they leave absolutely no footprints for you to track, and instead they launch a massive offensive charge directly from the sky above? That brings us right into Section 4, the combative defenders of the firmament. This is a massive pivot in our tactical masterclass. We are now talking about defending the firmament itself. While the support class is busy carrying the sky, the combative class is out there rigorously, violently defending its borders against infiltration forces. These are your sentries, your elite archers, the frontline forces fully dedicated to breaking the enemy's charge before it even begins. And they operate on 3 fundamental principles. First, you have the aerial volley. Think of this as a massive, overwhelming archery barrage designed to shatter enemy formations and establish a hard defensive line. Second, you have aerial zone control, where you actively alter the battlefield terrain itself to brutally diminish the enemy's capability. And third, you have aerial sensory techniques. This is where fighters literally expand their human senses to anticipate invasions before the enemy even makes their move. Let's look at a prime example of aerial zone control, the brutal, historical origins of the firewall. When an enemy infantry unit attempts to aggressively breach a fortified gate, the defending sentries don't just stand there and shoot standard arrows. No, they tip blazing cauldrons of boiling oil right down the walls, weaving a horrific, fiery trap. This isn't just about inflicting raw physical damage on the front lines. It is fundamentally about capturing enemy territory by turning the environment itself into a blazing, impassable death trap. You are effectively multiplying your defensive capability while entirely crippling their offense, forcing them into a panicked, immediate retreat. Then, we have the mastery of aerial sensory techniques. This goes way beyond just having sharp eyesight. This is about the ancient, almost mystical art of reading the wind. In high-level combat, every single attack, no matter how fast, has a preparatory action, a slight shift of weight, the drawing of a breath, the tensing of a muscle. If you can learn to read that subtle preparation in the air currents, you gain absolute, total foresight. An elite archer doesn't waste time aiming where a highly mobile target is at that exact second. They sense the entire flow of the battle, anticipate the movement based on the wind, and aim exactly where that target is inevitably forced to be. And that flows perfectly into our final section, Part 5, the rules of combative archery. This is where the rubber meets the road. This is the intersection of psychological theory and the brutal life-or-death reality of active combat. As the character Concordia learns firsthand during her incredibly harsh training, hitting a bullseye is, frankly, incredibly easy when your target is made of wood and hay. Wood doesn't move, hay doesn't shoot back. But battling a sentient, thinking, actively hunting adversary, that is a completely different ballgame. It requires strict, unyielding, almost religious adherence to a 4-part survival doctrine, and every single combative archer must memorize it if they want to live. Let's really walk through these slowly, because they are absolutely vital. Rule 1. Cover your blind spots to avoid traps. An intelligent, adaptive enemy is always going to probe and exploit the angles that you physically cannot see. Rule 2. Never, ever give away your position without a guaranteed clear shot. Releasing an arrow isn't just an attack, it's a flare. It signals your exact location instantly to everyone on that battlefield. Rule 3. If you find yourself in the terrifying position of being the one hunted, you must distort their senses. Use a silent bow and continually, unpredictably shift your geographic location so the counter-archers simply cannot pin you down. And Rule 4, honestly, this is such a profound psychological anchor. If you are discovered by an adversary who is vastly stronger than you, do not flee. I know every instinct screams to run, but you simply cannot outrun a more mobile apex enemy. Fleeing exposes your back, which is a 100% guarantee of death. But holding your ground, keeping your eyes fiercely locked on the predator, and guarding your blind spots, that completely changes the math of the hunt. It signals to that predator that attacking you is going to cost them far, far more blood than they stand to gain. Now, to truly master this combat doctrine, you can't just follow the rules in isolation. You have to actively combine them to see through complex diversionary tactics and permanently maintain your sensory advantage over the enemy. You have to constantly be on the lookout to identify bait, like those tricky scout-type arrows deliberately fired into the woods just to create a false trail and force you to foolishly reveal your position. You have to rigorously evaluate your enemy's tendencies, using their elemental affinities to predict their overarching long-term strategy. And most importantly, you cannot just cower in the shadows forever. You have to maintain the initiative. Remaining concealed for too long just hands control over to the enemy, allowing them to slowly cut off your escape routes and essentially smoke you out. Once that happens, you are forced to fight entirely on their terms, and that is a losing battle. It really is a brilliantly structured, cohesive way of looking at conflict and strategy. When you step back and look at a battlefield filled with literally infinite variables, you ultimately have to ask yourself a very hard question. Are you the shield that supports the skies, quietly filtering out the poison and meticulously coordinating the grand victory from the safety of the shadows? Or are you the arrow, standing boldly on the firmament, expertly reading the wind and decisively breaking the enemy line before it even forms? I am going to leave you with that provocative thought to ponder as you think about how to apply these masterful tactical doctrines to the conflicts and challenges in your own life. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer today, and as always, keep analyzing the world around you. Catch you next time.